Okay, weeks 9 and 10. Audio equipment is new, which is good, so I'll be cutting out a little bit less this time, which means less editing, which is nice. Okay, so week 9 is when I made the absolute biggest cuts to my project. I did use the ABC 1, 2, 3 rules, and I went through and decided that I had far too many A1 shots and that the ending was just going to have to be cut down. It is one of the harder decisions I've had to make, unlike the transition to just using outlines, which was pretty easy because it just came naturally and it fits well within the theming of the work. Cutting off the ending, that she does not escape the cave, she doesn't make it out alive, does change the nature of the text in a way that it doesn't reduce it, it doesn't ruin the meaning, it just changes it. It's a bit like Terry Gilliam's Brazil is also a sort of cautionary tale about questioning your comforts in a way, except the comforts are bureaucracy and order. And you probably already know this story, but in the making of that film, he was expected to cut off the ending where the protagonist dies, spoiler alert for Brazil, and replace it with an ending where he lives, and that he just feels the sting of having lived under a system that doesn't care about him, but escapes it just in time to never abide by that sort of thing again, I suppose. I haven't seen the version that they asked him to make. I don't even know if he made it. He ended up having a big fight with the studio system to get the ending he wanted. And in the end, the protagonist, much like my protagonist, dies as a result of their actions partly. And therefore the sort of consequence of the story is that much more severe and that much more ingrained into the viewer. In my story originally, she was supposed to go back to the spaceship and either pass out before she could warn her fellow astronauts of the danger and then be subsumed in the water that was rushing towards the ship, or die before she could alert them of the danger and then have her body be washed away by the water coming in to the ship. Either way, she was likely going to die, but it was in a sort of hypothetical future where we don't know for sure. Maybe something will happen. Maybe she'll wake up and get out somehow. I doubt it. That seems impossible. But there is no death on screen that 100% emotionally confirms it. And I'm still kind of thinking through the emotional effects that difference makes to an audience. One is so much more stable and unquestioned and dark and nihilistic in a way, which is an interesting issue because coming into week 1 and 2 of this semester, I was really dealing with the fact that my work was too nihilistic and I wanted to make it more optimistic. But I don't see a way in which that can happen that doesn't feel wrong. So I am just sticking with the ending that I have here. And then if I want to go back and add more shots in later, I will. But I think in terms of the shots that I could have cut, I think this is the decision that thematically doesn't damage the work at all. It just makes it a more condensed, more intense version of itself. And in the end, that is the best decision I could make given the time constraint. But I am still going back and forth on how it feels. Some moments from my practice in this last couple of weeks that I find interesting. The wave movement that I worked on in class, the close-up shot of her coming up to the monster, I did that one in class, and it looks really good out of context. And you'll notice that I put it up on the page, and people really liked it, and I really liked it. And then putting it in its intended context, the timing of it was all wrong, which is interesting. And the movement of the monster wasn't quite right either. So that's the first iteration that I'm playing right now. And then the second iteration of timing is here, and you'll notice the difference in the wave. And the third iteration of timing is here, and the wave it's where I wanted it to be. The movement is right. It's motivated, but it's more water-like, and it's kind of coming in closer, which creates less space for the astronaut, which I like. And that makes a big difference. And the difference was honestly just watching a lot of footage of waves and how they work. Because your brain thinks like, oh, okay, well, there's water displacement. So if a head is forming here, then water must be sucked up over there. And therefore the line is moving away from the astronaut. But it's not. It's encroaching in, which is exactly what I wanted it to do anyway. It just took me a couple iterations to do it. So that's one moment from my practice that I found interesting. And another, this is also in week 10, was the grass that I put in the bottom of this scene. So I've moved from doing colored shots to like just line work on plain backgrounds, and that partly involves just doing some little bits of scenery that establish the ground they're standing on, that kind of thing. So these are some pieces of grass that I did. Here we go. Okay, so I start out with these big cartoony bits of grass that are dimensional and have like each side of each blade of grass is established next to his feet. And then next we have just single blades of grass that are just like expressive little movements. And then little bits of the ground to establish where the ground is. And then finally I just cut out the ground altogether. And it works better. It does. And then you can see in this shot where I used to have it all the way out to the edge of the frame. And at this point, I've limited it to just about where they're standing to kind of frame them, because everything that's just outside of her view doesn't really exist. And that's another really interesting moment for my practice, is just like that. It's a little thing, but it's that kind of thing that makes a big difference. And I'm going to do something similar with some of the trees in the later shots, where there's just less and less and less background and more of him and nothing else really mattering but the two of them in the center of the frame. And that's a decision. It came about organically, like it wasn't intentional, but yeah, I really liked that. I really like how that feels, and it looks so much better. Okay, so some stuff that I watched in week 9 and 10 and coming into 11. As Kate recommended, Year of the Monkey, which I watched. It's very serious storytelling, but with humorous design and movement style. I really kind of envy the playfulness of the movement style, and I wish, this is the thing, and it's hard to insert that kind of movement at this point into a work that's already mostly finished, because it would feel so out of place. You know what I mean? Most of my movements, I've zeroed in on them being very emotional, and them being very, especially with regards to faces and things, very small micro movements that really matter to me. And that I think is I don't know, it's a difference in style, and it's also a difference in dimensionality that I've noticed. Like in Year of the Monkey, when a character puts his hands over his face, his hands are just the big 5-fingered shape of an illustrated hand at any angle, so that you are always reading everything exactly as it is, which is an interesting aspect, like exactly as a symbol of itself. You know what I mean? There's no sideways hands that your brain goes, well, what is that you can only identify when it rotates out of that position back into the shape of a hand. There's no ambiguity. It's very children's book-like, as you probably know. And I think that is it's a neglected aspect, the dimensionality of his movements. That they chose the sort of cartoon dimensionality. I neglected that thought when I first went into this project, and I kind of wish that I had encompassed it more, especially with regards to the times when things become more graphic and symbolic. I nearly said symbolic. And now, in retrospect, I'm thinking I could have and should have used that flat dimensionality of hands, faces, bodies, movements a bit better, or at least thought about how I could have. And it makes a big difference, so I feel bad about that. But I will see how I can introduce it into the future of my work. It was an interesting watch, especially considering my sort of gravitation towards ambiguity and symbology. The next thing I watched was Breakfast on the Grass by Prit Parn and Millard Kilk. This was a really interesting, especially with regards to thinking about monocolored shorts. This is another Estonian film, I think from 1987 or so. And it's I took a lot from it. I liked a lot of shots of people zooming up past the camera. I found them really evocative and really interesting. I liked the energy of it. Everything is so nervous and anxious, and everybody is so motivated and desperate all the time just to get the things they need to survive, whether it's an identity or an apple or a pair of pants or whatever. It's just about desperate people trying to find things desperately and the things they're willing to do that. And it made me reconsider how... Because when you're caught up in animating, as I have been, like I've been like, neck deep in practice for weeks now, you kind of lose, you get really caught up in like, how does it look? Does it look like good animation? Is the animation right? Does these things moving fluidly? Do we have the right arcs? Do we have the right starting and stopping and slowing and all that sort of stuff? And you often lose emotions in that sort of thing with regards to reactions and characters. And I don't want to do that. So I actually went back into one of my shots and changed the way that the character looks at the other character, because I felt she didn't look happy enough to see him, and she didn't look like she had been desperate enough to see him. And I think that helped a lot, and I think watching that helped me realize that. Anyway, let's see. Oh, yes. So I watched, Ishu Patel's Paradise because I thought it did resemble my work in style in some places. Because in the screen caps that I saw, it was all just white on black or color on black. And I found that really interesting. In the short, it's being used for kind of similar purposes. It's distinguishing the inside world of the temple or the castle from the outside world. And that's important because the main character is just like a plain black bird. And when he's inside of that space, unless he is this big, bright, colorful guy, he gets lost. You know what I mean? It's an intentional, it's a very smart stylistic decision. With me, I feel like I haven't really encompassed whether or not my protagonist really belongs to the outside or the inside world. She kind of belongs to both. I don't think I have made that distinction in the way that Paradise does. It gives the impression as well that sort of darkness and they have this very 1970s effect on all of the sort of crystal shapes. I think that's the impression that they're supposed to be like chandeliers and crystalline decorated accoutrement, and there is this otherworldly beauty to it that I don't know if I really encompass here, but I think it and I are on the same wavelength with regards to beautiful things and just the aesthetic beauty of dark spaces and single objects sort of standing out in those spaces. I think there is some overlap there that I really liked.